Hey everyone! In this tutorial, I'll be showing you how to build some responsive cards using CSS Grid. We'll be using Grid to go from 2 columns on desktop to 1 column on tablet and mobile. And we'll be changing up the Grid template to use a different card design between desktop and mobile. And we'll throw in some fancy hover effects just like we did on our last video on Flexbox cards. Sound good? Let's get into it! Alright, so we have VS Code open. Let me just show you the files and folders we're going to be working with in this project. So we have an index.html file, it's blank for now, and we are also going to be writing our styles in Sass. So I have that in the app SCSS folder in this style.scss file. And right now I just have some, global boilerplate styles, and we'll be adding to this later on. Then I have an image folder, and this just has the different images we'll be using for our cards. And I have a dist folder, and this is going to contain the compiled CSS file that we are compiling using Gulp. So I'm using Gulp and Browser Sync to compile my front-end files. If you don't know how to use that, you can check out my Gulp and Browser Sync tutorial that I have. And you can also get the source code for this complete project from my GitHub repository if you want. And that is linked down below in the description. So let's get started. In our index.html file, going to use the Emmet shortcut, ! and hit enter, and that'll automatically paste in some boilerplate HTML code, which is pretty helpful. It's a good time saver. So we're going to add a title here, and we also want to load our compiled CSS file. So link CSS, and in the href that's going to be dist/style.css, and that's because our Sass files get compiled to this dist folder with the CSS file. I think just for testing, I'm going to add an h1 tag and just say CSS Grid cards. And we just want to make sure that our Gulp and Browser Sync workflow is working. So let's load the browser. Might have to manually reload there. Okay, so it looks like it is storing our CSS styles, and it's loading correctly. Now the other thing I want to do is I'm going to use a font from Google Fonts. We're using this Poppins font. So you can go to fonts.google.com to get the code for whatever font you want to use. Select the weights that you're using. I'm using 400, which is regular weight, and 700, which is bold. And then you can just copy the tags there and paste it in your head like that. And I think you just want to make sure that you load the font CSS file before your own CSS file to make sure that that custom font gets loaded. So we're going to use Poppins down in our styles as our default font for all our text. Okay, now everything is saved. Let's double check our website. Okay, so it does look like the Poppins font has loaded. Next, we're going to create the markup for the cards. And before we do anything, let's check out the design so we can sort of figure out what markup we want to add. So here I have a screenshot of the finished design of the card. If we take a look at it, we have the image on the left, and then we have text content on the right with the white background. Then in the content, we have the title at the top, then we have like a description snippet thing. And then at the very bottom of the card, we have the date of the post as well as a read time. So we're going to create our HTML markup, for each of these elements. So let's go into our code editor again. So in our index.html file, I'm just going to start creating a markup for a single card, and then we can worry about putting the cards in a grid later on once we have the individual card design sort of nailed down. So since it's a grid of articles or blog posts, we want the whole card to be a link. So we'll start by creating a link. Doesn't really need an href. And then we're going to give it a class of card. And then in the card, we're going to start creating the different elements. So the image on the left is going to be card __ image. And this is using the BEM block element modifier approach for writing your Sass styles. And then I'm going to put all the other text elements in a sort of parent or wrapper element called card content. Then in the card content, it'll contain card title, card, let's just call it description, card, I think date was the next one. And then the last one is card read time. So we got that. So now let's add in the content. So the image is going to be an inline style. This is just better for when you're integrating with a CMS like WordPress. So the CMS can, insert whatever image you want right in the markup. So we'll say style, background image, URL, and this is going to load the images from the image folder. So image folder, and then cat1.jpg just to start out. So we'll save that. Then in the title, cat, I'm a kitty cat with a dance. And if you know the reference, extra bonus points to you. In the card description, we'll add some lorem ipsum text. So I'll do one sentence of lorem ipsum text. And we can always add or subtract text if it seems like it's not quite the right size that we want. Then in card date, we'll give it a date. So April 1st, 2021. And then the read time, we'll just say 5-minute read. Save that. And that is a good place to start for the markup. So we haven't really added any styles, but let's just see what it looks like in the website. Okay, so the markup is here. Because I made the whole card a link, that's why it has the purple, the default browser color for link text. So let's fix that first before we do anything else. So in our style.scss file, I'll say a, and then also a visited color white. And we also want to remove that underline. So text decoration none. Go back to our website. There we go. So it's gone. But we still have the hand cursor when you hover over it because it is a link, which is what you want. Okay, so now we can start adding the card specific styles. So card, and I believe the background, we want that. We'll just set it white for the whole thing, even though the image is included in this. And then I do want the card, if we look back at the design, I'm going to give it some rounded corners just to, kind of look nice. So border radius, and let's say maybe a medium roundedness, so 10 pixels. And then I guess the color, we want it to be dark gray or black. And let's see. I think that's okay for now. So let's see how that looks. Didn't take the style color. Let's see what's going on here. Gave it a background. But I think maybe it needs to be display blocks. I think the anchor links by default are display inline. Yeah, there you go. Not sure why this color's not working. Oh, because the color, I made it white. Let's remove that. Don't want it to be white. Okay, display block. We'll just do display block for now. I think eventually we're going to make the display grid. Actually, let's just try display grid by itself. See what happens. Okay, that's good. So as long as it's not the default display inline, the properties like background color and such will still take effect. And just for the heck of it, I'm going to add some global padding to the body to add a little bit more space. Just say 3 rem all the way around. There's a little bit of breathing room there. Okay, so let's check and make sure the image is loading first of all. So it's not erroring out, so that seems to be working, but the image isn't showing up because it has no height, and that's because the div doesn't have any actual text content, it just has a background image. So let's give it some height. We're going to use display grid for the card, so instead of setting height of whatever pixels to the image, I think it's a good time to now implement our grid properties. So to do that, I'm going to go to Adobe XD, and I just kind of created this mock-up for the purpose of this tutorial. But when you're working with CSS grid, at least for me, it really helps to have a visual representation of what the grid template, meaning the layout of columns and rows, is going to be. Otherwise, I just try to think of it in my head, and I can get kind of confused, and it'll just take longer overall in the end. So here we have a layout of both the mobile and desktop versions of the grid. So this one up here on the top is the mobile layout, where we have the image on top and then the text content below it. And then below that we have the desktop layout, which is what I showed you in the screenshot, where the image is on the left and content is on the right. The thing with grid is that your template is basically sort of like a table, where you have lines creating rows and columns, and each line is numbered starting from the beginning. So the pink lines here, it starts at 1 on the very left, and then 2, and then 3. And then the numbers keep going up depending on how many columns you want. The reason I want 2 columns is because of the date and the read time. So I'm putting those in separate cells, I guess you could say. So that's why we need 2 columns, and the 2 columns go through the entire template. Then for the rows, we're going to have 1 row for the image, 1 row for the sort of the text content in the card, and then the last row is for the kind of meta information about the post, so the date and then the read time. So that's why we have 2 columns, meaning 3 lines, and we have 3 rows, and we have 4 lines for that, because you have a beginning line and an end line. So you have 1 more line than the number of columns or rows. Then for the desktop layout, we have a slightly different set of columns and rows. So we have 3 columns for the desktop, because we have the image in 1 column, then we have the column for the date, and then the column for the read time. So we have 3 columns, and then that means you have 4 grid lines for the columns. Then for the rows, we have 2 rows. So we have the top row for the image, the regular content, and then we just have that second row again for the information, the date and the read time. And again, the lines kind of go through the entire thing. So that means that this image, for example, would take up, this top big cell and then the bottom one as well. And these numbers are going to be super helpful when we start creating the grid template properties, because that's how we're going to designate what part of the grid template that each content in the card is going to take up. Okay, so let's start creating these styles for the mobile version of the card. So we need to first get grid template columns and sort of designate the column layout and widths. Then I'll do grid template rows for the rows. So for the columns, we have 2 columns, as we said, and they're going to just be equal width. So let's add that in our SAS file. So this is for the card. So we already have display grid to turn on grid, and then we'll say grid template columns. And we want 2 columns, and since they're the same width, we can actually use the repeat function. And we'll say 2 columns, and they'll each be 1 FR in width. The FR unit is the fractional unit, so that means that 2 columns will be the same width of 1 FR. So essentially each column will be 50%. Then for the grid template rows, let's take a look back at the design. So we got 3 rows, and the first one is for the image. So I'm going to probably give it a specific height, maybe something like 300 pixels or so. The second row is going to contain the content in the card. And this is probably going to be variable, since each card might have a different length of description. So that needs to be variable. We'll probably have that be 1 FR so that it can change. And then the last row is for the date and the read time. We could set it at a specific pixel height, but I think I can set that to auto. So it'll just kind of take the height of whatever the content is. So let's say grid template rows. So we're having 3 rows. We can't use the repeat function since, they're all different, but the first row that's for the image, we'll say 300 pixels. And then for the content, we're going to say 1 FR, so that can be variable. And then the last one is auto. Now let's go into our browser. I think something, oh yeah, so I created the template, but I haven't assigned the position in the grid to the card elements. So one really cool thing in the browser, I'm using Firefox, but I believe you can do the same thing in Chrome, is that they have a Flexbox and Grid Inspector. So we're using the Grid Inspector since we have grid, and you should be able to see that. Maybe a slightly different color. So it'll actually tell you, what the grid template is, and it has the column and row numbers for you. So similar to what we had in the design. And it looks kind of messed up because we need to actually assign the positions for each of these elements. So in the first element, which is card image, I'll say ampersand underscore underscore image, and that's a SAS thing where the ampersand takes the parent, so the card class, and then content. Then after content, we have title, description, date, read time. So I'm just going to kind of stub these out here. Title, description, date, and read time. So the first one, image, let's look back at the design. This element is going to span for the columns from column line 1 to column line 3. So we're going to put that in the image. So grid, column, and this will take 2 parameters. So the first one's going to be the start column line, and the end column line will be the second one. So it starts at 1, then you do a /, and then you do the where it will end. And I believe we said 3. And then the row image will go from row line 1 to 2. So we'll do the same thing. So grid row 1 /2. So we'll save that. And then for the content will just be the title and the description. So I need to change that in my HTML. Yeah, so the date and read time are not going to be in content since they're in their own row. So it'll be kind of like this. There we go. Okay, so card content is going to go from row 2 to row 3, and then from column 1 to 3. So it'll span the entire column. So going back to our styles for the card content, we'll say grid column, and it's going from 1 to 3, same as the image, to go all the way across. Then for grid row, again, starting at 2, since it's right below the image, and it'll go to 3. Okay, let's just see how this looks in the website. Okay, so the image is on top and the content is on bottom. And even though we didn't explicitly set the position in the grid template for the date and the read time, grid is kind of intelligent. So if you have more content, it'll just kind of follow the existing grid template. So that's why you have the date on the last row on the left column and then the read time on the right column. I think I'm still going to explicitly designate it in the styles just to be as clear as possible. So let's do that, and then we'll go and sort of tweak the CSS styles. So since title and description are in the card content element, we don't need to assign them any grid column or grid row positioning. So let's go to the date. So in the design, the date goes from column 1 to 2, and then row 3 to 4. So grid column 1 to 2, grid row 3 to 4. And then read time will go from column 2 to 3 and then row 3 to 4. So the row is the same as the date. So we'll just kind of copy that. And then we'll add grid column 3, or I'm sorry. I think I did the date one wrong, but the read time is going from column 2 to 3. 2 to 3. Oh, that's right. Sorry. I was thinking of, I think, the desktop design. Okay, so now we'll go to our website. It looks like everything is in the right place. So now we can just kind of go in and style the text, and also we need to fix this background image thing. So first, for the image, it's repeating, which I don't want it to do. So let's go to card image, and I'm going to say background, and I think you can use a shorthand property. So I don't want it to repeat, so I'll say no repeat. And then for background position and size, for the position we'll say center, center. And then we are adding the background size. I'll just say cover. Okay, so it's a little off kilter here. I think just because the width is so wide, but we're styling for the mobile, so let's use that for now. And then we can figure out the desktop styles later on. So this looks actually pretty good. We have the image on top. 300 pixels might be a little tall, but you know, we'll just leave it for now. We can always fix it later. And then everything's in the right position. So let's go ahead and add those text styles. So for the title text, we'll say font size, and we'll make it a bit bigger than the regular text, 1.75 rems. We want it to be bold, so font weight we'll set it at 700, which is what we downloaded from Google Fonts. And then I'm also going to add some space under the title, so I'll say margin bottom 0.75 rems. Okay, and then for the description, we'll say font size, we'll just go with 1 rem, that's 16 pixels. And then I think oh yeah, we want to add line height as well. So usually for title text or text that's a bit bigger, you can have a line height that's closer to 1, so it's not, you don't want too much space in the titles just for readability. But then when you have text that's smaller, it's good to add a bit more space. So we'll say line height 1.5. And then for the description, I think we'll also add a margin bottom, probably the same, to add space between the description and then the date and the read time. Okay, so then let's go down to the date and time. And I think I'm going to make those the same font styles. So we're going to add another CSS selector. This is a compound selector, so divided by the comma. And these will apply to both the date and the read time. So we want to make it a little bit smaller than 1 rem, so maybe 0.9 rems. We'll just say line height of 1, just to keep it the same, so we don't have any additional spacing. And I think that's good for now. So let's see what that looks like. Cool. All right, so we got the title, see the description text here, and then the date and read time at the bottom. Now we need to add a little bit of padding, I think. So let's add some padding to the card content, since that's where the title and description are stored. So we'll say padding, and we'll just say 1.5 rems. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, that seems okay. Card content. And then we want to add similar padding for the date and read time. So since these are separate, I think I just want to add a padding bottom to both of 1.5 rems, and then a padding left for the date of 1.5 rems because it's on the left side, and then for read time it'll be padding right 1.5 rems. All right, let's get in there. Let me uncheck the grid inspector just so we can see it without the lines. So we got the image, we got the title here, description stuff. I think actually I might remove the body padding that I added, just to make a little bit more room, and we'll add a little bit of spacing later on. 0. Okay, so here we have our first card, and that looks pretty good. Looks like the read time needs to be all the way at the right. Let's turn on a grid inspector again to check that out. So yeah, so you can see the read time is in its own cell, but we want it to go to the right. So we can do that by aligning. Let's just test it in the browser first. So read time, we want to add a style here. And since it's a grid child, we can say justify self. And that controls the justification or horizontal alignment of just that one item. So if I say end, it'll get positioned to the end. Default is start, which is on the left. So we'll add justify self end for the read time. There we go. Didn't copy. Justify self end. Okay, so now it looks a lot better. Let's uncheck the grid inspector again. And I'm pretty happy with that. I think the spacing looks okay. There's spacing all the way around. So let's create the rest of the cards. So I'm just going to take this element and just duplicate it a few times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we'll have 6 total cards. And then we'll just see, yeah. So we're here. Now you notice there's no spacing between one card and the next. So I'm going to add a gap property to what would be the parent. And we actually need to create that parent because I didn't do it yet. So all these card elements are going to be stored in a cards, maybe let's say section. So I want to take all these cards and put them inside the parent cards element. There we go. So now I can add the space between the grid elements. So let's add the styles for cards. And This is also going to be a grid, display grid. And I'm going to add a gap property of maybe 0.5 rems between the cards. So let's see how that looks. Okay, maybe a little bit more. Let's try 1 rem. Okay, I think that's a little better. So you can see this if I select the cards element and I turn on the lines for that. It's a little hard to see, but this tells you how many rows there are, and then it has that 1 rem of space between each card. And the cool thing about this is that it doesn't add space all the way around each of the items, but it only adds space between cells in the actual grid template. So since on mobile, this grid template is 1 column all the way down for the cards, it will only add space between card items that are next to each other. So it's not adding any space at the very top of the grid, and it's not adding any space at the very bottom of the grid either. So it's pretty smart that way. Right now, I think the gap property is only widely available for grid. They're making a gap property for Flexbox, but it's only, I think it only works in Firefox. So you can use it if you want, but it's not widely available. Okay, we did the mobile styles. Let's make the desktop ones. So what this means is that we're doing a mobile first approach. So that means we're making our mobile styles our default styles without a media query. And then on top of that, we will add a media query to target, tablet and or desktop styles. The biggest thing that's going to change is the grid template, right? The columns and the rows layout. So let's add our media query. So media min width, and let's say 56 EMs. We're using EMs just because it's better for responsiveness and browser support for media queries. This is really the only place I use EMs. Otherwise I use rems. And I guess that could probably be a video topic in and of itself. What units to use for your sizes. So 56 EMs equals a little less than 900 pixels. So this will be good for anything above a tablet size and up. So let's just start off by copying what we have in mobile, and we'll adjust the values. So going to our desktop designs, this is what we're going to use for tablet and desktop. So we have 4 columns. I think the first column will have to set a specific width again because it's the image. So maybe we'll just try 300 pixels again. And then we're going to have 2 columns of equal width. So I'm going to set each of those to 1 FR. So the space will be divided evenly between them. So let's do that. So grid template columns. Actually, I can keep that repeat to 1 FR. And we'll say 300 pixels. So this will create 1 column of 300 pixels followed by 2 columns of equal width. Whatever is available after the 300 pixels has been given to the first column. Then for the rows, similarly, I think we have 2 rows, and I think the first row might be a variable height just because of the description content could change. And the second row will probably just set to auto again. So let's try that. So 2 rows, 1 FR auto. And then since we've changed the template, we do need to add new grid column and grid row values for each of those items again. So it does seem kind of like a lot of work, but I think the advantage of grid is that it gives you just a really good level of control over your layout if you need, a specific template of columns and rows. Okay, so for the image is going to go from column 1 to column 2, and then row 1 to row 3. So grid column 1 to 2, grid row 1 to 3. And then I'll just copy this. The content is going to go from column 2 to 4 and row 1 to 2. So 2 to 4 and 1 to 2. 2 to 4. 1 to 2. Then we have our date and read time. Let me copy that media query again. Look back at the design. So the date will go from column 2 to 3 and row 2 to 3. 2 to 3, grid row 2 to 3. Oops. And then read time. Read time will go from column 3 to 4 and row 2 to 3. 3 to 4, 2 to 3. Okay, so hopefully this will look okay in the browser. So let's see. So let's change our device to maybe an iPad. Landscape. Okay, maybe I'll just turn off the emulator since we're going to do desktop styles soon. So here we got the mobile styles up until here. So this is where that media query hits. And we're going to go back and sort of fix this again. I'll probably limit the width that a card can be, just so it doesn't get too wide like this. Okay, so this is where the sort of tablet / desktop styles begin. And it looks actually pretty good. Yeah, so we don't really need to fix anything. So why don't we go in and add the new images and description text and title text, just because it's a good idea to see how the design might change with different lengths of content. I think that's something that it's good to test out beforehand so you don't figure it out, you know, when you push something to your production server and then have to go back and fix things. Okay, so let's do the images first. So 2, cat 3, cat 4, 5, 6. Let's make this title a bit different. Meow, meow, meow. Meow, meow, meow. Purr, purr, purr. I'll just leave that. Okay, so now title is different. I will change the description text as well. Let's make this a bit longer. So 2 sentences. This might be really long, but we'll just see how it looks. Try 1 sentence, and then we'll even delete some of that to make it even shorter. And we'll do another short one. Lorem, 1 sentence. Delete a bunch of stuff. And then we'll try 2 again, but we'll delete a little bit so it's not super, super long. And the last one, we'll just do 1. Okay, let's see how that looks. Okay, so now we can see how it looks with different content. You can see the cards get taller when there's more description. Okay, so, you know, overall things look okay. So the next thing we want to do is I actually, for desktop widths, you know, I don't want the card to get super, super long. So at a certain width, I want there to be 2 cards in the grid. So let's decide where we want to put that breakpoint. So here is where we started getting the card. You know, I might actually make this smaller. Let's change that breakpoint. Instead of 56 and 56 EMs times 16, which is the base font size. It's about 900 pixels. So let's make it smaller. I think most tablets are, let's see here. iPad is 1024 by 768. So 768 width. So we should maybe do 800 for tablet to target kind of tablet styles. So 800 times, or sorry, divided by 16 is 50 rems. So I'm just going to replace all the instances here with, what did I say? 50 rems? Yeah, 50 rems. 50 EMs, I should say. Replace all. Okay, check back on the site. So now it is 768 width. And here's where it hits. But, you know, honestly, I think anything above maybe around here is good. So this is 484. So let's make that actually a 500 for the breakpoint. So 500 divided by 16 is 31.25. So we'll replace that with 31.25 EMs. Now, it might seem really arbitrary that I am setting the breakpoint for the styles at just kind of what I'm eyeballing it, but I think that's actually a little bit better. That's a little, might maybe want to make the width smaller there. But I think it's actually a better approach because you can set your breakpoints based on the design. So like where the design starts breaking or looking weird, that's where you can put your breakpoint, you know, for each little module or whatever. Let's try to polish this a little bit. So this looks fine at the mobile width. Then as it gets bigger, right here, it's a bit strange, right? So I think we want to make that image narrower. So let's do a little bit of a test. So right now it is 300 pixels wide, but let's try maybe 150. See, that looks way better. Let's try 160. Okay, so we're gonna do 160 for the image width, and that is controlled in the grid template columns. So we'll say 160, I think. And then we'll probably have to make the image a bit wider for, you know, larger desktop sizes. Let's just see how that looks. So here's the mobile version, and it gets a little wider. There we go. Now we have to figure out where do we want this image to be, wider than 150 or 160 rather. So it looks fine here. So maybe around here or so is where we can do that. So that's 700. So maybe, what's this, 734. So let's say maybe 750 is when we make the image a bit wider, maybe 800. So 800 divided by 16 is 50. I think is that the original one that we did? And we can just add it underneath. So min width 50 EMs. And we'll make the grid template column 300. There we go. All right, see how that looks? Okay, so this is the desktop style. And then as we get narrower, the image gets narrower. So this looks really good. And then slowly, now we're down at the mobile styles. So it looks pretty good. So I'm pretty happy with that. Yeah. So now let's figure out where we want the cards to go, two up. So it starts looking long, like maybe around here or so. Yeah, around here is when it's a bit long. That is 954. So let's say above maybe 900. So where's 900? This is about 904. Maybe 950. Yeah, we'll do 950. And that's when we'll make the cards grid 2 columns. So 950 divided by 16 is 59. We'll just say 59. And that is controlled in the cards. So right now it's just display grid. So it sort of defaults to just 1 column. So I think I can say 59 EMs. And then I'll say grid template column. And I want 2 columns, so I'll use the repeat thing again. So 2, 1 FR, since we're just gonna divide the space between them. Okay. That looks a bit funny, right? So this looks okay. It starts looking a little like the image is a bit too wide around here, around 1268. Let's go down a bit narrower. Yeah, it looks not great. So here's where it breaks. So probably the same breakpoint where it goes to 2 columns. We want to change the image width again. So we'll copy this media query and we'll go down to the card. And that was at 59. So just going to do it here. And we're changing the grid template columns to be 160 again. Okay, so that looks okay. Yeah, that looks okay. It seems a little bit squished, but I think that, as it gets longer, it's okay. Let's see what actually would show up for your iPad. So with your iPad, this looks fine. Let's see landscape. Landscape is where it looks a bit weird, but I think it's still acceptable in my opinion. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now, one thing I am going to do is I personally like to limit the width of elements for really large screens, just because, you know, if this gets really long, it'll start looking a bit weird again. So it's just usually a good idea to sort of keep things in a container. So let's see how long these cards are right now. So this is 670. So maybe I'll try limiting the width of the card to maybe max. We'll put in 670 so you can see it in the browser. So what I want to do, so where do I want to do that? I think I can do it for the card element itself. Let's just see if that works. Max width 670 pixels. Okay, so let's see when we get really wide. Okay, so you can see that is working. However, that's not great because it's creating the gap. So I think that's not the right place to do it. So I think I want to do the max width on the container card, and we'll just do 670 times 2. So in the cards container. So max width. And that's going to be 670 times 2, so 1340. Okay. There we go. So that looks a little bit better because then the extra space is just added on the end here. And then what you can also do if you want, this depends on the design, is maybe you want to center that. So I will also do margin auto, 0 auto, and that should center the grid on the page. There we go. So any extra space will be equally divided if it gets really wide. And then it's just normally responsive like that. Let's also add some padding to the cards container since we removed it from the body. So padding, just 1 rem all the way around. There we go. So now, let me turn off the grid inspector. Okay, so now there's some space all the way around. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now, since these are links, the whole thing is linkable. The next thing we want to do is add a hover state to the card. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a gray overlay that will go over the entire card and then a read more button in the middle. And this is one really cool thing you can do with grid. Usually to do something like that, you'd have to use position absolute for the overlay, but we're going to use grid instead because with the power of the grid template, you can actually completely overlap elements in the grid. So let's do it. And I guess I should have done this before I copied everything, but we'll add another element. This will be called this will be called card overlay. And it's just gonna be an empty thing like that. And I'm just gonna have to manually copy it in each card. There we go. Okay, so card overlay, and then we'll add the style down here too. Overlay. Now we want to place this overlay in the grid template. So first, just so we can see it, we'll say background RGBA, and I'll say 0, 0, 0, which is black, and then we'll give it an opacity, maybe 0.5. So then hopefully it'll show up after we position it in the grid template. So going back to our grid thing, so we really only need this hover state for desktop because there's no hover state on mobile really. So for grid columns, the overlay is going to go all the way from the beginning to the end. So columns will be 1 and 4, rows will be 1 and 3. So let's add that. 1 and 4. 1 and 3. And I think I'm only going to set this to be visible on this media query. So I think what I'll do is I'll add all these grid styles inside the media query. So this will only really take effect here. And then let's just do a display none, just for good measure. Display block. Or actually, we want to use opacity. We'll set opacity to 0 to begin with. But we'll do that later let's just kind of get this working. Okay, so let's go back to our browser and let's see if this works. Displays none. Why is it display none right now? Oh, yeah, display block. There we go. Okay. So it's not, it is display block. Grid column 1-4. Why is that not working? So the grid column is working. Oh, I did grid column and then grid row. That's why. There we go. See, typos really mess you up. Okay, looks like the overlay is now loading, which is great. So we can turn off the grid inspector. So I want it to go over the whole card. It looks like it is not on top of the image because its z-index is not set, and because the image, because the overlay comes before the image in the markup order, it means the image is going to be on top automatically. So we could fix that either by moving the overlay after everything, so it's on top, but I'm kind of lazy and I already put it here, and I personally like putting overlays first, so we can fix that by doing position. I guess we'll just do it for the desktop stuff. Position relative. So this will set the position. Since the image doesn't have its position set explicitly, this should put the overlay over it. Yeah, there we go. So now the overlay is working, and now we can also add the content. So I think I'm going to do a span read more, and I'll need to replace the other ones too. Let's just fix it in the first card. So card overlay in the span is going to say read more. So we'll add those styles here. And this is going to be, I'll say display inline block. This is so I can add different properties like padding and such to it. So I want to say read more, and then I also want it to have like a square, it'll be like a square button type thing. So we'll say border 2 pixels solid, and it'll be white. And the color will also be white. Okay, and let's just add a little padding just to see. 1 rem and maybe 3 rems. So I'm basically just creating a square button here. Okay, so you can see the read more buttons visible on that first one. I'm also going to do uppercase, so text transform uppercase. And let's make the font bold, make it stand out a little bit more. Okay, so I think that's okay. Now I want this in the center, so we're going to use grid again. I guess we could use flexbox too, since we've been using a lot of grid. So let's just do flexbox. Display flex, and then justify content center, align items center. So now it's in the middle. Actually, let's just do grid all the way down. And I think for grid, it's items center. There we go. So see, it accomplishes the same thing. So, you know, there's some things you can do with either flexbox or grid, whatever your preference is. I think also it's a little bit too transparent, so I'm going to add a little darker gray background to that in the button itself. So let's do background RGBA 000. I want it to be darker than the overlay, so let's do 0.75. See how that looks. Okay, maybe a little too much. Let's try 0.5. Okay, so 0.5 on the overlay and then another 0.5 on the button, so it'll go like that. Okay, so this is the hover state. So I'm going to use the opacity property so it'll only get displayed when you hover over a card. So by default, I'm going to make it opacity 0. And if we're doing a hover state, you usually want to do a sort of animated transition. So we'll say we'll transition the opacity property say the timing of the animation will be 200 milliseconds, and ease in, out is my sort of default. So by default, the overlay and the button is going to be opacity 0. So then we need to add a hover state. And I think I can do it here by doing card hover and then the ampersand to select the overlay. I think this is the right syntax for that, but we'll test that and see. Okay. Oh, that looks good, but where's the button? Okay, button's only on that first one, I forgot. So that's working. You could also do the hover state in the card selector itself. So I could have done, you know, under the card selector, hover, and then card overlay, opacity 1. That would accomplish the same thing. So you can do either. It really depends on your preference. I just did it this time so I could keep, because this is the opacity for the overlay itself, so I want it to, you know, be under the overlay selector. So it's card hover, and then the ampersand will get you, I guess, the parent selector, which is the card overlay. Now we need to go back into the markup and then copy this into each overlay. I'll just maybe replace the whole thing. Okay. All right, so now we got, look at those hover states. Okay, and we'll do one more test just to check all the different widths. Actually, let's use the emulator. So we got the iPad landscape, iPad portrait, and then we'll do iPhone portrait and landscape. Okay, so that looks pretty good. And that's it for building some responsive cards using CSS Grid. Let me know down in the comments what you thought of these cards, as well as any suggestions you might have for a future video on different UI elements that we can build. And as always, thanks for watching and keep on coding.